The first morning, I noticed the envelope nailed to my mailbox. It felt like someone had taken the polite face off the neighborhood and left the teeth behind 3 lines, black type. Violation, non-compliant fence, and a signature that read like a crown. I'll tell you straight up, I moved out of the city to get away from noise and people who loved being petty for sport, not to inherit it. My name's Sam Ryder. I used to wear a different title, county magistrate, but out here, I was just a man who liked a coffee on his porch, a workshop in the back, and a quiet life. That lasted 3 weeks. Fox Hollow is one of those places where every yard has a personality, and every personality has an opinion. Across the street lived Marco Big Hands, small tractor, could fix anything except a broken heart. 2 doors down was June, who kept the best azaleas in 3 counties and could track a rumor by the time it had 3 lies wrapped around it. And then there was Elaine Hartwell, president of the Fox Hollow Property Council. Sharp gloves, sharper shoes, and a smile that made people read the fine print on their friendship. She ran the council like it was a church and a courtroom, and she liked sermons and verdicts in equal measure. When I told Elaine I'd be building a privacy fence along my western boundary, she stared at my permit like I'd handed her a counterfeit coin. "Sam, you know the covenants," she said, and her voice had this slow-burn sweetness like a honey trap. "We can't have fences that block the view." I had the surveyor's map, the permit stamped by the county, and the contractor waiting with boards that smelled like summer. I smiled because that's what you do when someone tries to make you the problem in a story where you're not even the character yet. I should have taken that smile off too. She called the council meeting at noon. She called the sheriff at 1:45. She called the entire cul-de-sac like she was handing out rolls, and when the patrol car rolled up, I handed the deputy the permit like it was a cold, clean slice of truth. She stood on my lawn, hands on hips, one of those poses that's equal parts theater and accusation, and said, "You're intimidating the neighborhood." That was her version. My version was, I obeyed the law. The deputy looked at my paperwork, then at her letter, then back at me. For a while the world narrowed to the space between the deputy's eyebrows. He said, "All right, let's sort this out without a citation," which meant, in Fox Hollow code, go home and don't make it worse. That silence after the deputy drove off, that was the hook, the part of the story where you realize you've woken something up. Elaine started with notes, then fines, then a blog on the council's website that read like a dossier. People on the block got letters about trash cans and garden gnomes and mailboxes, tiny tyrannies wrapped in municipal language. Marco's fence got a safety hazard tag, June's azaleas got a complaint for obstructing sight lines, and my mailbox got a sticker that said non-compliant. The council met in the park pavilion like a private parliament, and the more people crumpled under those sticky rules, the more she smiled. I began to collect things the way a detective collects dust: receipts, contractor invoices, copies of emails, screenshots of the blog. I don't know when curiosity becomes obsession. It's a thin line, and most of the time it's crossed for the right reason. I started attending council meetings, not as their guest, but as their witness. Elaine had allies on the board, names that appeared on invoices for maintenance, landscaping, and legal fees that seemed to travel in circles back to one company, Hartwell and Hartwell Enterprises. It's funny how community upkeep can turn into private profit if you open the ledger. Opening the ledger was a mistake I couldn't unsee. That's when the harassment went from paper to percussion. Tires slashed on Marco's truck. A stone through a neighbor's workshop window. Someone painted a slur on the side of my shed, broad strokes, meant to humiliate. It reads differently when your life is suddenly annotated by other people's anger. I put up cameras, both to watch and to make the watchers visible. One night, the camera saved us all. It was just after dusk when the trespasser came, masked, heavy boots, moving like someone who'd rehearsed intimidation in a garage with cheap lights. He smashed the sign I'd put up supporting a petition to reform the council, shouted something I couldn't make out, more noise than language, and then, in a moment that flips the stomach, he fished something from his jacket and raised it. It wasn't a showy gun, and I'm not going to dramatize it into a movie weapon, but it was enough to be a weapon if he chose it. The man pointed, shouted, and the neighbor who filmed it later said the sound was all wrong. The voice sounded small through the mask, like a child trying to be big. We had footage. We had a date when the council had voted to double the maintenance fee. We had a man in black on a camera that couldn't lie. We did what people do when the rules are broken on a scale bigger than a sticky note. We organized. Marco knocked on doors with a clipboard like it was the only thing he trusted. June made coffee for the first meeting in the community center and put it on the table like a treaty. People who'd once whispered to their lawns started speaking to one another. Petty fears dissipated in the light of shared outrage. We filed a criminal complaint. We went to the county and asked hard questions about the invoices. We sat in a lawyer's office that smelled like paper and hope and laid out the facts in a way that made them messy neat. Elaine, of course, had a countermoved hired an outside attorney who loved the sound of his own arguments. He filed a restraining order against me, accusing me of harassment. He called my petition a campaign of defamation. They put pressure on vendors to back out of contracts, threatened homeowners with liens, and sent letters with big, black headers something about community integrity, as if the letters themselves carried more weight than evidence. The design was obvious. Make the cost of resistance unbearable. But the footage of the masked man, the timeline of invoices, the email that showed a board member approving a payout to a shell company was a kind of currency that cut through the theatrics. We delivered copies to the county prosecutor and sat in a pew of folding chairs, watching the system we'd trusted bend toward the truth. In court, under the glare of lights and the scratch of pencils, the fragility of their narrative began to show. Their lawyer had rehearsed cynicism. Our case had roots in receipts, timestamps, bank transfers. People gave testimony. Marco, June, a young contractor who'd been afraid to speak because he worked for both sides until he realized working for both sides meant working for no one. There was a hearing where Elaine sat like a queen waiting for a coronation that never came. I remember the exact tilt of her chin, the way she sharpened her words into accusations. "You're rewriting history," she said, and you could see the way she expected history to listen politely and agree. I answered in a voice that was quieter than hers and steadier. "I'm recording it," I said, and the judge leaned in. We played the clip of the mask at dusk, the file with the invoice chain, the email where a check had been approved to a company registered at an address that wasn't an office so much as a mailbox. You could hear a pin drop somewhere in the room. That's a small, ridiculous sound, but in moments like that it's the sound of a lie losing its rhythm. When the county moved to investigate, the council's veneer cracked. Board members who'd smiled in meetings started taking calls in the parking lot. Some resigned. The maintenance fees were frozen pending audit. Elaine tried a few last things letters to neighbors about unfounded claims, a petition to force a recall of the prosecutor, subtle bullying like a hand at the back of the throat. People who had been too afraid to speak found their voices when the ledger was read aloud and the mask was played on a loop. Community is a strange thing. Sometimes it's made of fences and bylaws. Sometimes it's made of people who show up with coffee and receipts. We want enough to change the conversation. Not all battles are gavel to gavel. Some are neighborhood by neighborhood. Elaine was charged with a handful of offenses: fraud, coercion, a couple of things that made local headlines, and the council's contracts were put under a microscope. Assets were frozen. More importantly, the board was reconstituted with people whose names you could pronounce without thinking about who they paid on the side. We didn't get a parade. We got transparency. We got a system where invoices were posted online and meetings recorded. We got a place where you could say, "I don't like this," without making the sheriff your first call. For me, the personal change came quietly. I stopped being just the man who wanted a quiet workshop. I became the man who watched a small town remember how to hold itself accountable. There were nights I lay awake thinking about power, how it smells, how it accumulates in folders and envelopes, and the way some people treat rules like tools while others treat them like prisons. I had to reconcile the fact that the law I trusted could be used to heal or to hurt, and that most of the time it's the people who decide which way it goes. I won't pretend the ending is tidy. Elaine's supporters still exist, and there are meetings where tempers flare and words are sharper than they should be. But Fox Hollow is different now. People look at a ledger and see a pattern, not a rumor. There's a kind of quiet I like, again, not the kind that hides things, but the kind that comes after a neighborhood remembers how to talk. If you take anything from this, let it be this: systems are only as good as the people who watch them. Rules can protect, or they can be twisted. The difference is an invoice, a camera, a neighbor with the courage to knock on your door. So tell me, what would you do if your community started to look like Fox Hollow did? When does order become oppression?